All right, guys, this week's guest, we have David Richards with us, author, veteran, yoga instructor, life coach. David, welcome to the show. How are you today, sir?
Man, George, I'm doing well. What a year it's been already. We're like 8 days in, but I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me on.
No worries, man. Yeah, it has been a eventful few days, 8 days with into the year. And what I love to do is when I bring my guests in, have them give me a little bit about your background, kind of introduce yourself to my audience and kind of let
Yeah,
them know kind of who you are and what your background consists of.
yeah. So I was born into the Marine Corps, and what I mean by that is my dad was a Marine, and I didn't realize like all the things that civilians think about when they're going to like start their career, their life, or whatever. None of that to me. Like the closest thing to me was writing. Like that was something I was pretty good at. But I like at some point I became a Marine. I went through college, became a Marine, did that for 15 years, and then comes like, you know what? I don't want to make this the family business. There's something else inside me that's calling to me. So I got out, didn't do retirement from Marines, but like wanted to explore this other side of me that I kind of neglected over the course of how I shaped my life. So went into the civilian world, started yoga like right away, like a week after I got out of the Marines. I was taking my first yoga class. And that for me was like this huge revelation of kind of this connection between my mind and body. And like there was something going on that I wanted to explore further. And so I took my first yoga class. A year later, I became an instructor. Um, and then like my life progressed, but I was still kind of making some of the same mistakes that I'd made. And so kind of in 2017, I was like, I got to focus things. And so I read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And in the
Very
book,
cool.
he talks about what is your life's purpose. And I was like, what are you talking about? My life has a purpose? Like, what?
Supposed to tell
Like,
me what that is, right? It's supposed to
yeah,
be
I was blown away because like in the Marine Corps, to my life, like you just moved from one spot to the next. And that was kind of how life happened. And so
right.
in the Marines, it was like, okay, well, where do I want to go and what do I want to do? And now you're telling me I have a purpose to my life. And so like I wrote my first purpose statement and I started writing my first book. And I had tried, like I'd known I'd been good at English, but when I joined the Marines, I kind of threw that away. And then I was like, all right, well, there's still something that's calling to me and I want to like answer that. And so I got out and I started like trying to write horror stories because I love Stephen King. Like
There you
Stephen
go.
King was my go-to as a kid. Like anything that if you can read something and words on a page are going to scare you, that's a good writer. And so
Right.
like that was Stephen King for me, but I could never finish these stories. And then finally in 2017, I'm like, I'm going to write a book about finding your purpose in life because that's what happened to me. And so I did that. It was international bestseller, number one. But it was also like this struggle because like I didn't think I could write a book. Like I'd written hundreds of pages and then just like let it go. And so writing that first book was its own journey. And then like between that and like Tony Robbins and like starting to think about what you actually think about matters, that kind of led me to my second book, which is about mastering your mind, because it's like, all right, well, if the war, if being in the Marines has taught me anything, is that there is an art of perfection. And you look at like the Eastern way of war with like Sun Tzu and stuff like that, and the Western way and war with Clausewitz and his theory of on war, and like you can absolutely achieve like kind of this master view. And I know we talked about it before we started recording, but like General Mattis for the Marines, who was Secretary of Defense under President Rumsfeld or President Trump, excuse me, genius. Like this guy is like, you want to talk about someone who's embedded himself in history. So that was a huge influence for me. It was like a respect for someone who has devoted their life. Like, what does it really mean to put your life and commit your life to a certain thing? And that was the question I started realizing that I was answering through my own writing of books, and now working my third book in the year of a pandemic and stuff. So my whole thing in life is help people to like kind of free themselves from the prison of their beliefs, because we are all subject to whatever we believe, and that is the prison we live in. And you may say, well, I believe in a lot of good things. Great, but you are still locked in. And certainly with the course of what's happened over the past week, you see that there are some people who are operating in a terribly damaging prison of belief with the insurrection and sedition that happened this week.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, and and we'll dive a little bit more into it. And I kind of just want to go back a little bit
Yeah.
into your your career within the Marine Corps, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, and we'll dive. I have a couple triggered questions as we move forward, but what were most civilians just think structure and things of that sort when you think Marine Corps, but what was the biggest thing that you gained out of your career in the Marine Corps, and if you can dive into just kind of what your career was, or what you
Yeah, yeah,
within the Marine Corps.
yeah. No, it's funny because George, like, so growing up in the Marine Corps, and that's how I figured, like, that's how I picture myself. I was growing up in the Marines base. And if you're not in the military, familiar with the military, that means you didn't live on a military base. Like, most of the time you live on a military base with other military families, and there's like this commonality and bond that you share. Well, like, we lived in Maryland, and it was off base. And this is like the Vietnam War was just kind of winding down. And I didn't have a sensitivity or an appreciation that people might feel a certain way about my dad being in uniform. Like, I didn't appreciate, until one day we came home from a beach vacation, and there was a cross burned in our yard. Like, someone had gone and burned a cross in our yard. And so, like, that, I didn't process it like completely at the time, but that had a huge influence on me. And so, but I also resented the fact that growing up in the military, you move every 2 or 3 years. And in one sense, you're putting your heart into these relationships, like getting to know people and becoming friends with people, even as a kid, because that's like how you develop. And then, like, it's, oh, guess what? I'm leaving, and you're never going to see me again, because this was well before the internet and before Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and everything else. Right. And I was like, okay, you no longer exist in my life. We were best friends yesterday, and I am never going to see you again. And so, like, it's hard to process that as a kid. You do, but that doesn't mean you come to accept it. It means that, like, it influences your life. And so, like, as I kind of got older, when I went to college, like, it was like, how are you going to pay for college? And I was like, well, I wasn't focused enough to be a good student grade wise.
Right.
So it was either scholarship or ROTC. And so, like, okay, ROTC. So, well, screw the Marine Corps, because that's been a bad experience for me, because I have this resentment toward my dad and toward this, like, entity of the U.S. Marines that I can't really necessarily quantify, but, like, I hate them because we moved a bunch. And so then it was like, I'll join the Navy. Navy's like a good thumb in the nose, because, like, they're very, like, it's ship oriented and all this other stuff. Well, so I went to Penn State for my undergrad, and, like, you have to take an ROTC class every semester. And so the first class you take as a freshman is like naval weapons engineering. And so it's kind of cool, because you're like learning about Tomahawk missiles and all this other stuff. And, like, Top Gun had come out a few years before with Tom Cruise, and you're like, oh my God, I want to be a pilot. But then, like, the second semester, your spring semester of freshman year, is, well, ships engineering. And so now they're talking about, like, mechanical engineering board. And for me, like, I'd gotten recognition as an English, like, in English, I'd, like, gotten some stuff published as a kid. Like, in high school, I got national recognition in a contest, and my mind did not compute engineering. And so, like, I got, like, my only F in my entire academic career was my spring semester of freshman year. And so I was like, I got to join the Marines. And my college roommate was my best friend from high school. So his dad was a career Marine, but he had gone into the Army. And because he was going to go to Army ROTC, because he had the same sort of, indifference towards the Marine Corps. And, like, around the same time, we're like, we got to go into the Marines. So we jumped into the Marines. I didn't get it the first time. That was devastating for me, because I'm like, wait, but, like, I'm a legacy, like, automatically accept me. And I started to realize, like, I had to put forth effort to make this happen. So to kind of fast forward, I got it. I graduated college, went right into the Marines. Went to artillery school, which is in Oklahoma. It's an Army school. And then I went to California, and the unit that I got assigned to was already working up to deploy on what we call a WestPac, or Western Pacific deployment. So, like, it would jump on, like, a Marine unit would jump on with Navy, and we would be gone for 6 months, leaving San Diego, and just kind of be on patrol in the Pacific. Well, it ended up, we went to Somalia and did Operation Restore Hope. Like, I was one of the first probably 50 Marines in Operation Restore Hope that made it ashore. And in some ways, like, that whole process was wildly entertaining because you don't realize how the military works. But like, I joined the unit and we're doing all kinds of crazy like helicopter training and like we're shooting artillery stuff all over the place. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, like I'm dropping out of like what they call the hellhole of a helicopter, like in the night, like 40-foot rope. And it's like, this is so cool. Like,
I get paid for this? Hold on.
yeah. I'm like, well, I do Spartan races now. And I'm like, I got to pay for what I used to get paid to do. So like I was really enamored, but then you kind of realize that the Marine Corps operates like on a budget. And so once you're no longer in like the sweet spot of being deployed or being, up against kind of combat or whatever, no money comes to you. So like I settled into my career, wasn't writing or anything. And like 10 years into my Marine Corps career, I just got promoted to major. I was working for a boss who used to paint. And George, like for me in the Marines, no one was super artistic. It was like this revelation. I was like, oh my God, my boss, he was a military police officer. He had been a Boston street cop. And so it was like this salty, grizzled colonel. But I'm like, I had so much respect for him. And he had paintings done in his office. And I was like, this is incredible. And so it kind of inspired me to start writing again. So I started writing poetry. Well, like in the poetry in the Marine Corps, like I remember people saying to me, like, are you gay? Like, what are you doing? And it wasn't like this necessarily like accusatory thing, but it was like, dude, what the hell are you doing? Like, no one writes poetry. Like, and like for me, poetry, like I got two master's degrees coming out of the Marine Corps. And one of them was certainly because of my poetry, because like my boss submitted it on my behalf. But like I got to a point in my military career, I was like, this isn't like, I don't want to cookie cutter what my dad did. Like my dad did 31 years, Vietnam vet, Mustang, officer enlisted. And I was like, there's something else calling to me. So I got out abruptly, kind of like I had a surgery. I had a benign tumor in my neck. Duty station, I was working in Miami, but I was kind of working in Central America because we're trying to help modernize the militaries down there. And I kind of got to a place, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, what's really important to me? It's important to me that I continue the family business because my brother has, still active duty at that point. He was in like 26 years or something. Or like, do I answer whatever this thing into me? And like, I've always been a romantic person. So I got out, got to work in corporate America, but tuned into yoga, which is like this big revelation for me. And then that kind of led me down this path of like discovering that there's more to life than just this physical thing that we experience. And like, there's a spiritual element to it. And that kind of led me to my two books and where I am today.
No, that's a great story, and it is something that most people, unless you have that military experience, you don't draw what you gain from it. Now looking back at it, and we were talking pre-show on just some of the habits we still have. What are some of the things that has carried over from the Marine Corps that has kind of helped continue to shape your life, even though you may not want to? Dang it, that's a Marine habit, but it's really helped in regarding to being creative, writing the book, and achieving what you're really trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, I think, well, it's a great question, and you really asked some kind of deep things. Let me try to break it down into two parts. I think first, having been in combat, even in Somalia, and I say that with air quotes because like when we first landed, I remember Somalis shaking my hand because they're so happy to see us. But then we were only because we kind of kicked the door in and like larger forces like the Army, the Air Force, and then more Marines came in. And so like after 2 months we left because it was like we're kind of the person who breaks down the door, and then we get back on our boats and float away somewhere. But I remember like at the end of that, like we had Somalis being like, fuck you, screw you, American. You're like, it's been 2 months. Like, what happened? And so, like, in one sense, it was like, whoa, this is like a really big thing. But I think to go back to like the question, for me, I developed this sense that it's hard to say because I feel like in some sense, like the Marine Corps gave me so much, but I think when but being in combat, you realize like the world operates differently. Like, and I think when I look at the pandemic and certainly 2020, we are so used to planning our lives days and weeks and months in advance.
Right.
And in combat, you care about like the 30 seconds that's in front of you. Like you bring like that. And I think when you talk about, if you've heard stories about like veterans coming back from Afghanistan or Iraq, certainly like 5 or 10 years ago, and then like speeding on the highway in San Diego because they're looking for that rush. Well, part of that is because when your life is in danger, you bring all of your awareness into the present moment. It's like, okay, what is happening right in front of me? Not what am I going to in a week? And so that so for me in the pandemic, like even working in my job today, I remember like I work for a large IT company, and at some point we were making the decision on, we have to move everything from working in the office to working at home, but we need to maintain this operation. So we started talking about this, and we had these like daily meetings and stuff. And I remember at some point someone, we're like 2 weeks in or 3 weeks in, and someone said, hey, I'll just be glad when things get back to normal. And like, I had to be the voice to say, shut up. This is normal. Like what is happening right now is the new normal for as long as it happens. Like stop thinking that you're going to go back to, I've got kids soccer on the weekends and we're going to like vacation in 2 months. That time is over for now. Like that may come back at some point, but it's going to be very different. So like, this is normal what you're doing now. And I think that's something that unless you've been in that kind of urgent situation where like your life is in danger, or not that your life is in danger necessarily, but that like you need to be really attentive to the present moment, it's really hard because people are like, well, I don't have a frame of reference to draw from. And I think that was the beauty of like, especially Marine Corps training, is it's super uncomfortable and super stressful, but you're used to this kind of austerity. And what you're realizing is you're kind of getting used to focusing on the present and just like what's right in front of you, rather than planning out this comfort that, okay, I've got, in 3 weeks, we're going to vacation here. In 6 months, I'm going to visit with my parents or whatever, so it really kind of reorients you to being present in the moment. And I mean, ultimately that's what life is, right? Like the more you can be present, the more you can experience a beautiful life.
No, that's 100%. And I have the same similar story, because when I got back in 2013, kind of the opposite, because I did route clearance. It took me a while to kind of get going more than 2 miles an hour, because I had to be so hyper focused at driving so slow, looking for roadside bombs, that my wife's like, "What are you doing?" It was like, "I'm sorry. It's just you get into it. This is what life was." And it took me time to adjust, but my mind becomes so hyper focused on the freeways to where it was just like, look, and I would start looking around. So I definitely understand that. And even coming into 2020, it was like, okay, again, the pandemic is something unheard of, but I can't say I was really razzled, and I don't think many veterans are, that have been to combat in those situations, because it's, we end up being locked down, right? It becomes a very routine of, you can't go outside the gate unless, these 5 things need to happen. So I definitely feel you there. Now, as you came out of the military, and, you kind of found that purpose, and I kind of want to dive into the books mainly on the mindset, because as we talk in throughout the show about people trying to achieve their goals and moving forward and trying to kind of live their best life, the mind tends to be one of the things that we refer back to as being a showstopper. uh,
Yeah.
for most people, just through your experience, and you can piggyback off the book if you like, but where do you see, when it comes to the mind, that people tend to fail, and why?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And honestly, it's kind of what my third book is about, because we create these thoughts, like, and we don't realize, part of it is we don't realize the power of words. And like, if you look at what, for example, President Trump says, he communicates in very simple language, and it's very easy to understand, but the words themselves are very like bombastic. Like his language is super confrontational. And we kind of miss understanding what's really being communicated, because it's like, it's just like this guy, but then you realize like, well, this guy's in this important position. So like your words form your thoughts, and your thoughts form your beliefs, and then your beliefs control your life. And that is like that. There's no more simple equation than the words you use to govern your thoughts and shape and form your thoughts are then the thoughts that form your beliefs. And those beliefs are the box that you live in. And so part of that is like, for me, my journey as a writer has been like, how can I use words not only in my writing, but as a reflection of like who I am to be positive, constructive, because every single word that passes through my consciousness is somehow a reflection of me that I'm, shaping or manifesting. And so if I use words that are harmful or, angering or whatever, that's what I'm manifesting. And you can't disconnect from, oh, well, I just said that in anger. I didn't mean it. You said it. Like the fact that you said it means that you have this part of you that is uncontrolled. And until you learn to get control of that, you're always going to be subject to what this anger or this emotion, whatever it is. And like, that's a huge piece. So, for me, it's interesting because I tell people, my first book did super well, international bestseller, #1 on Amazon in 2 categories, self-help book. So I shared examples from my life and, I was honest and candid, and it was an okay book, but it was a struggle to learn how to write a book because I'd never done it before, but I did it. And my second book, fiction book. So like I wrote a story, but the story is also meant to help people because it's about mastering your mind, because ultimately, like we all have this gray matter inside us and we think, well, our mind is just this space, but I know that I can think thoughts that make my heart feel differently. And I can think really beautiful thoughts that make my entire body feel differently. So my mind isn't just my brain. There's something else to it. And it's like, well, okay, how do I get close to that? Because I want to master that so that I can create a life that is beautiful, not just for me, but if I'm like really embracing like whatever divine nature I have inside myself, then I'm going to make beautiful for life that for the people that I come in contact with. And I think that's, for me, that's one of the biggest journeys, especially over this past year.
No, and and that being said, and you can put your coaching hat on for this one.
Yeah.
When as you talk to folks in regards to their words and their beliefs, like what would be some tips for folks to actually kind of analyze, if their words are manifesting the wrong habits or the wrong thoughts to then lead them down, I guess, the wrong path,
Yeah.
being unsuccessful when we talk about trying to be, successful and prosperous and achieving their goals?
Yeah, it's a great question, George. I think part of it is if your thoughts or the words or the things that you're envisioning come at the expense of someone else, they're not being successful. Because ultimately, real success should be I'm benefiting, but so are you. Because like that's coaching. Like I tell people, the beauty of coaching is not that I give my client the answers, but that I've asked a question that has given them kind of the leverage to ask themselves the question that gets to the answer. Because then when they own the answer, it's like, oh my gosh, I know how to figure this out in my life. That's a very different equation than if David says, hey, George, here's what you need to do to fix your life. Because now you're taking my advice. And it's like, if it doesn't work out, you're like, well, David doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And you kind of have to give your client the own advice. And I think in a similar sense, like you have to, like everybody has a success formula. Everybody, like, I'm a big admirer of Tony Robbins. He's been hugely successful. Ed Milet, another like entrepreneur, hugely successful. Dean Graziosi, wildly successful. The best thing they can do is offer, this is what's worked for me. This is what's worked for me. And some of that is like, oh my God, I can apply that. Like I've been to 2 Tony Robbins events, transform my life, absolutely transform my life. But then there are other elements where for me, it's been like, okay, how do I advance myself? Like, how do I become a better version of myself? And that has nothing to do with Tony Robbins. That has nothing to do with Dean. That has nothing to do with anybody else. That is all about me. And so I have to figure out, okay, based on what I believe, based on what my life experience has been, how can I put words together? Because again, words are thoughts. Like you can't have a thought without a word. You can have a feeling, but how you kind of interpret that feeling is by putting it into words. Like, oh my God, she is so beautiful. She could I realized I've been blind my entire life until I saw her, and then I really understood what beauty of. Like that's me expressing a feeling about someone specific in my life that I can like relate to. But otherwise, like a feeling can just be this thing that we become enamored with. So like the whole, like our entire existence, like the fact that you and I can communicate is based on the words that we exchange and share. Like if I'm saying stuff that doesn't make sense, then we're not going to have a good talk. But if I'm saying stuff that resonates, it's going to make sense. So it comes down to like, forget about your thoughts, forget about the habits, forget about the patterns you use, look at the words you use, because those words are the building blocks of the life that you've created based on the beliefs that you have.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, it's legit, man. Like that's the cool thing about like coming. That's the cool thing. Like some of this stuff is like I've been writing a ton. I was telling someone earlier today from my next book. I've written like 600 pages, and I don't even think I've started writing the the final draft yet. But like you get to a place where you're like, there's an honesty coming out of me, and when you're speaking truth to power, it's like this beautiful thing. So you just kind of let it go.
Right. No, and that's kind of, and that's really kind of how all my shows go, right? Because it's pre-show, I talk about, oh yeah, we're gonna, try to stay with it within, this time frame, but the conversation just ends up being so
Yeah.
great that you let it flow. There's no reason just to cut it short. And leading into that, kind of looking at your bio and a few other things. One of the questions that really stood out to me, kind of looking over everything, was looking at how you really master your mind. What does that mean of mastering your mind? And two, what are a few steps that can take someone on that path to master your mind?
It's such a good question, and I'm going to share a story with you, and I'm completely honest with everything I say. This is exactly with it. Like I'd done one major rewrite. I had an editor come talk to me in like July, and he was like, "Here's the big problem with the book." So we wrote the book. I rewrote it. Like I was super like, instead of being like, "Oh my God, I have to rewrite this entire thing," I was like, "Okay, how do I do this?" So I rewrote the book. And then I decided I was going to do a mastermind with Jack Canfield. So if people aren't familiar with what a mastermind is, it's where you take someone who's got like expertise. And if you don't know who Jack Canfield is, Google him. But he's sold 500 million books. He's probably the best selling author in history. And I did a mastermind with him in March of last year, 2020. So I had just conceived I was exiting a relationship in October of 2019, finished The Lighthouse Keeper in November 2019. It was exiting a relationship, finished the book. And I was like, I knew for the first time in my life that I really put my heart and soul into this relationship. And even though it was really hard to get out of it, I knew whatever was going to come next was going to be better. And so but my third book, I created this idea that somehow this idea had come to me that who we are is more important than what we do. But there's a relationship between the two. I understood because what we do is always shaping who we are. And so, but that was going to be my third book. And I was going to call the book Being, BEING, like how to win the game of your life. So The Lighthouse Keeper, my second book, was supposed to come out at the end of March. So February happens, we start getting news of hey, there's this virus, people are getting sick and what's happening. March happens and the world starts shutting down. March last year, the world started shutting down. This mastermind with Jack Canfield, I was supposed to go with 16 other people to Santa Barbara, California, where he lives, and 3 days with him. And you'd have 45 minutes in the hot seat where you would propose your idea to him and he would give you some advice on it. 6 people decided they were going to make the trip to California because the pandemic was shutting things down. So I left from North Carolina. We were doing this like March 19th or something, and flew out to Santa Barbara, landed in LAX, airport's deserted. LA is deserted, which is, if you've been to Los Angeles, is never happens. Like LA is just like this cholesterol clogged freeway. And so we do this thing, and I present my idea for this book that I have just started kind of getting around to. And I say, the book is about, I look at my last relationship. I wrote poems to this woman every day for 6 months because I'm a huge romantic person. And so like, I'm an adult, smart, 6 months of poems on average, 2 a day. And some days 3 or 4, some days it might be 6. Like it was just whatever I felt. And so like I did this, relationship didn't work out. Like I made mistakes. I kind of like had this reconciliation. So I talked a little bit about The Lighthouse Keeper with Jack when I was in my hot seat. And then I turned my attention toward my third book, Being. And so I kind of laid that out. And again, like at this point, you don't have a sense that the pandemic is going to like change the way we live. Like it's March. It's like still fairly early. It's just this weird thing that's happening. So I lay the book out, and Jack, he gives me some thoughts about, hey, he talked to these people. And then we're finishing. And he's like, you've got a year. And I was like, I've got a year. What are you talking? Like, what do you mean? Like, there's no debt. Like, you can't give me a deadline to my own book.
Right.
Like, what do you mean I have a year to write this book? So I get back home, and I kind of have this thought in my head about how the book's going to proceed. So the next weekend, I was supposed to go to Florida actually to do this like public speaking thing. That event got canceled because now we're starting to shut things down.
Right.
So I decided, okay, I'm going to write the book. So I start writing the book on a Word document, Microsoft, and I get like 22 pages in. I'm finished for chapter 1. And I'm like, you know what? This isn't the book I'm going to write. Like, this is just another book. So I set my computer aside. I grabbed a pen. I grabbed like a little journal I had, and I started having this conversation. And it was like this conversation between, it started out with like, I had like a green pen, and I would write like 5 sentences on a page, and then I would turn the page. And it was almost like this text conversation. And it was like this pen was saying, like, I'm going to tell you a story. And like, this is like a long time ago. This is who I was. And I've been a madman. I've been a king. I've been a tyrant. I've been a friend, a father, all this other stuff. And then suddenly something compelled me, like, okay, grab another pen. And so I grabbed a blue pen. And now the blue pen had a different voice than the green pen. And so I started a conversation, like I was creating these characters, and it was really simplistic, but it was also like really heavy. And so I finished the first draft, and it was like 115 pages, but it only took like about 20 minutes to read because it was almost like a text conversation.
Right.
And it was these 2 different voices. And it was like they were having this dialogue, and one was kind of this view of the mental aspect of things. Like there's a logical way to like the logical component to the way we live our lives. And so like I wrote the first version, it was really cool. And then the next weekend I wrote another version. And like I'd been meditating for years, but I'd heard of Dr. Joe Dispenza. And so I started doing his meditations, and his meditations were like, you see the Avengers stuff behind me. His meditation was like, hey, there's a quantum field that exists. It's real. And if you can take your mind or your awareness, like the idea that whatever your consciousness is focusing on, if you can take your awareness to the quantum field, then you can make anything happen. Because like we live in a time-space field, and the quantum field is space-time. It's like the complete inverse. And it was this really kind of exotic and wild thing. And it made me think of Avengers Endgame because like they travel through time, and they're like, but like he was like, this is completely legitimate. And so I started doing that. Like I started doing some of those meditations, and I had like a mystical experience. And so for me, that like shaped kind of the rest, like that has shaped the last year of my life. Like every day I journal something about this book, and I go back to this guy that I'd never met before, who sold 500 million books, who at some point during our conversation, he said, hey, done past life regression. was a Roman. So I'm like, okay, I'm kind of trusting and going into this experience, but it's like been super level for me.
That's awesome. You know, I love the story, and I hope everyone is drawn, you know, to your story, and just along your journey, guys. So again, just take David's story and really look at it on yourself, because a lot of these things, they do happen for ourselves. We have, like you said, you know, a lot of people will plan out and put forth a path that worked for them, but it's really up to us to look at it, modify it, and tweak it to really, you know, yeah, I can try it, but that didn't work. But you know, this kind of worked over here, and this worked a little over here. Kind of make those two together to kind of make my path and move forward. And that's
Yep.
really, you know, what this show is all about. Is as we move forward, yes, we look at goals and things as projects, and yes, there are plans out there to help you. But again, my goal was to bring outside the box thinking, again, because we do run into a lot of roadblocks, and we stop ourselves from doing so much. And one of the biggest shows that I've talked about is, hey, we've made a plan, and at the point of execution, a lot of times we end up freezing because now we're scared because of our mind, because of the words that we've, you know, told ourselves,
Yep.
now stopping us, you know, stopping us from moving forward. And these are ways that we can move forward and ensure that, you know, we continue to succeed and continue to grow ourselves. Now, David, moving into 2021, you know, last year was what it was, and we're still lingering from it.
Yeah.
You know, if you had to give some advice for, you know, my listeners moving into 2021 on, hey, I have this goal, you know, I really want to I really want to crush it with this, you know, how do I get over the hump? What would be that piece of advice?
Yeah. Part of it, great question, George. I think part of it is you have to, part of it for me, like you have to embrace your fear. And what I mean by that is like, we all want to aspire to be the best version of ourselves we can be, but we all have like things that hold us back.
Right.
And we try to like minimize those things. And in some ways, we're saying, if I minimize it, I'm not going to give it any energy, but it's still there. And, for me, whether I looked at relationships or how I treated people or whatever, it's like, all right, well, what if I turn into like, what if I address like the shortcomings in my life or the things that have kept me from really being honest with myself about my life. And that's kind of the dark side. And so like part of it is like embrace that, and you don't embrace it like, okay, I'm going to turn myself over to it, but it's like, what do I really believe about life? Like, what do I really believe is true? Do I believe that there's like a higher power? Like certainly, we go back to, I don't know if you talked about it in your shows or anything, but the Great Conjunction, so December 21st, 2020, the winter solstice, we had the Great Conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, which also is called the Star of Bethlehem, which is also called the Star of David. And oh, by the way, it happened 5 days before Christians celebrate the birth of Messiah. And it's like, okay, I can say, well, that's just a crazy coincidence. Like sometimes the universe does that. Or I can be like, you know what? I'm an educated person. This is 2020. This is the hardest year I've ever gone through. That's a sign that the universe is designed like in a certain way. And you know what? I'm going to pay attention to that. So part of it's that. But the other piece is, I think more pragmatically is focus on what you can control. And we talked about, I think, pre-show, so many of us are used to planning our lives weeks and months in advance that we sort of forego like any sort of entertainment or pleasure in the immediate moment, because it's like, oh my God, I can't wait for Friday, or I can't wait to go on vacation, or I can't wait for that. Well, I want a life that I love every minute of every day. And the best way to do that for me has been like, you know what, instead of worrying about what am I going to do at the end of January or at the beginning of February, or where am I going to go on spring break, today is January 8th. How can I make today as amazing as possible? Because ultimately, January, February, end of January, beginning of February, Valentine's Day, whatever, spring break, nothing of that's guaranteed. And that's not to say that something horrible is going to happen, but it is to say, I want to be alive as much as I can possibly be alive today. And so part of that is, what can I focus on that I can actually control? I can't control what happens in Washington, D.C. I certainly have thoughts and feelings about that, but I can't control it. I can't control what happens in the economy. I can't control these other things. I can control how I interact with people. I can control who I interact with to a certain extent, and I can control what I focus my attention on. And if I do those things well, then it doesn't matter what's happening in the external world. I wish things were different, but my life is going to be pretty good because I'm focusing on the things I can control.
Oh, that's great, because we do, and I've talked to other guests about, we have this problem within ourselves that we end up, trying to focus and balance our lives between professional and even our own personal, that 9 times out of 10 we are going to do something to ensure that we help somebody else, or do something for others, and a lot of times those things are out of our control, and we don't look at being able to adjust and move the things within our own lives that we can control.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree, and I think part of it is, there's nothing wrong with doing things for other. Ultimately, what we'd like to do is do something for someone else that also fulfills us in some way. And for me, like, that's been a huge part of what coaching has been, because, like I said earlier, when you help someone shift their perspective on their own life situation and kind of provide themselves the path out of that situation, that's tremendously empowering. It's like they've solved something in their world that is super helpful, and all you did was ask a question to do it. But like, you get this tremendous sense of satisfaction. It's that, and that's a very different feeling from, oh my gosh, let me take time out of my day to help you because either you didn't plan well, or I agreed I was going to help you and I forgot about it, whatever the case may be. And yeah, I want to do something good, but I come away with it being like, oh, now I'm like 2 hours behind or whatever. So, part of that, again, but it comes back to the words that we use, because those words create our thoughts, and that then creates our beliefs. And so it comes back to, okay, well, what are the best words I can use for myself to position myself to be as fulfilled as possible, while also helping other people?
Oh, David, that's awesome. Now, for my listeners out there that want to find you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so davidrichardsauthor.com. You can go there. I blog, like, I try to blog once a week. It was a little hectic during the holidays, but um, lead and live through crisis and live through kind of the world we're living today. I'm certainly there to offer help too. So.
No, most definitely. And all of David's links will be, on our website for the show. So again, if you didn't catch that, make sure, just check us out at the projectlifepodcast.com, and in David's profile, all his links to the book. If you want to grab the books and things of that sort, will be there as well. And David, I thank you for your time and coming and enlightening us and sharing with us not only your experiences, but, I think the biggest takeaway for anybody, today. And it's funny, as simple as it sounds, and you hit on it earlier, that words do matter, uh, in more than just the smallest sense of something that you tell your kids, that words matter, but even as adults, on how we treat ourselves and how we shape our lives, and understanding that words do matter as they shape our beliefs. And David, thank you for the time. And I hope 2021 is way better than what 2020 was, and the book comes out to be another great success. And I'd definitely love to have you on again, after the book release, and we can definitely talk about the book once it releases, at that point.
George, that would be great. Thank you so much for on, and I'm glad to talk with you and share my message with the audience. And yeah, I would love to come back. I'm so excited about this book. It's been a beautiful discovery for me, kind of understanding what it really means to be a writer. And again, it comes back to like creating something that I find so fulfilling, but I also know that people are going to find fulfilling too, and that's like the ultimate reward. So I'm really looking forward to sharing the book when it comes out, and would love to talk with your audience again.
Awesome, David. You have a great rest of your evening, and thank you, sir.
George, thanks so much.
No problem.
Bye bye.